Welcome to Knife Chats. If you like this video, please take a moment to leave a comment. Thank you. A look at the official knife of the Cub Scouts of America. In this episode, we'll look at the possible origins of this iconic knife.
Would you believe there were Cub Scout knives before there were Cub Scouts? It's true. Well, technically it's true. Really what we mean is there were Cub Scout knives before there were Cub Scouts. Let me explain. As you may know, the Boy Scouts of America were formed in 1910. At that time, you needed to be at least 12 years old in order to become a Boy Scout. Almost from the beginning, parents were clamoring for an organization for boys under 12 years old, similar to what the Boy Scouts of America were, and they were pushing for the Boy Scouts of America to adopt a program for boys under 12 years old. The Boy Scouts were very hesitant to do this because they thought it would take away from the main program. Despite the Boy Scouts of America's interest in a program for younger boys, several programs started popping up almost as soon as the Boy Scouts of America decided they weren't going to be interested in doing it. And one of the most successful was the Boy Rangers of America, which started in 1913. And many of these programs were known as Junior Scout programs. Now that brings us to the next thing. As everyone knows, there were official Boy Scout knives. This is a post-World War II Boy Scout knife, but it'll do for the example. The thing with Boy Scout knives is they were official. However, there are plenty of companies who are making knives that just, here's one from Iroquois Knife Company from the 1920s, that have Scout on it, and it has all the same blades as a Boy Scout knife, and it is the same size as a Boy Scout knife, 3 3/4 inches long. And so there are plenty of Scout knives out there that were not official Boy Scout knives. And one type of knife that they decided to come out with was a smaller Scout knife. And because of all the Junior Scout programs, these knives were known as Junior Scout knives. Now this is a standard size Scout knife. Here is a Junior Scout knife. And if you notice, it's slightly smaller. Instead of 3 3/4 inches long, it's only 3 3/8 of an inch long, or sometimes 3 1/2 inches long. And the cool thing about a Junior Scout knife is it has your spear blade, and then it has on the back side your cap lifter screwdriver and a can opener. But those are the only blades that you find on the Junior Scout knives. And these, like I said, came out as early as 1910, 1920 also. So they were coming out as quickly as the Scout knives or the unofficial Scout knives were coming out. And obviously the big difference is, besides the length, the Scout knife also has a Reamer or punch blade. So 3 3/4 inches long versus 3 3/8 inches long for a Junior Scout knife. And these were marketed for the Junior Scout programs. And then in 1930, the Boy Scouts of America finally decided we need a junior scouting program. And they decided to call their junior scouting program Cubs. So these were going to be the Cubs for the Boy Scouts of America. And it actually says, as you can see here on all of their literature, Cubs BSA. And almost as soon as the Boy Scouts of America adopted their cubbing program, which is what it was known as, knife companies started calling their Junior Scout knives Cub Scout knives. So they were capitalizing off of the Boy Scouts of America. However, the knives usually, it would either say Scout knife or just Scout or something on it. It would never say Cub on it. But they were called Cub Scout knives because they were a small Scout knife. However, the Cub Scouts of America, they haven't even formed yet because they're still just known as the Cubs or the cubbing program for the Boy Scouts of America. Now, as I mentioned, the Cub Scouts were known as the Cubbing Program, or the Cubs, in 1930. It would be all the way until 1948, or 18 years later, before they would officially become the Cub Scouts, and it's at that time that they would adopt an official Cub Scout knife with the Cub Scout logo on it. And here's one. This is one of the first ones ever made by the Imperial Knife Company, and it differs from the earlier Scout Junior knives or the earlier Cub Scout knives that were unofficial knives, in that the blade choices are different. So here we have your official Cub Scout knife, and you'll notice it has a spear blade, a cap lifter screwdriver, and a reamer, as opposed to the Junior Scout or Scout Junior or unofficial Cub Scout knife, which has your main spear blade, a cap lifter, a can opener, and a cap lifter screwdriver. So here's the difference between an official Cub Scout knife and the unofficial Scout Junior or unofficial Cub Scout knife from before 1948. And you'll see the difference in blades. Another thing that everyone always notices is that the official Cub Scout knives have a safety feature which actually locks the cap lifter screwdriver and the reamer with these little press, the liner locks here. So you have to press the liner locks in order for those to close. No such safety feature was available on the earlier Junior Scout knives or Cub Scout knives. These blades just open and close like any other slip joint. So that is how this knife was the first Cub Scout knives, though they were not really Cub Scout knives, and they also were around before the Cub Scouts actually were around. Now I know what you're thinking. You're telling me the Boy Scouts of America had this cubbing program and they did not have an official knife for their cubs. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is this knife, the Cub Scout knife, the official Cub Scout knife, was not around between 1930 and 1948. The Boy Scouts of America instead were using a different knife, and I think they were actually marketing it specifically to compete with these unofficial Cub Scout knives. Now this knife here is a copy of a Remington knife that came out around 1931 to 1936, somewhere around there. And it is an official Boy Scout knife. And the first thing you can do when comparing it to an actual Boy Scout knife is you'll notice it is shorter than the actual Boy Scout knife. This is a Junior Scout knife. And it is the same length as these unofficial Cub Scout knives, which means it's also the same length as the official Cub Scout knife of 1948. And what you'll notice, here's your unofficial Cub Scout knife with its spear blade and your can opener and your screwdriver cap lifter. And here is an official Boy Scout knife. This is actually a replica, but you'll see official knife, Boy Scouts of America. And on the back side, you have a can opener and a cap lifter screwdriver, just like you find on the unofficial Cub Scout knives. So I believe what was happening is the Boy Scouts of America started coming out with these 3-blade knives right around the time that the program was beginning, or the cubbing program was beginning, and I think these knives were actually being made for the Cub Scouts. They're slightly smaller and marketed towards the boys. So this is probably the first official knife being made for the cubbing program. So you could think of this as possibly the first Cub Scout knife. And then it slowly evolved into this knife, the official Cub Scout knife of 1948. But this does bring up a question. If this was the beginning of the Cub Scout knife, why does this Cub Scout knife have a reamer and this Cub Scout knife, or official Boy Scout knife, have a can opener? Why the change? And I can think of a couple reasons, and the one reason is the Reamer has more uses than you do with the can opener. The can opener can just open cans. You can do many more things with a Reamer than you can a can opener. But there's something else to it also, and that's, if you notice, there's also all these safety features on these Cub Scout knives. And the big one is that the Reamer and the screwdriver actually have locks to hold them in place. Now, the earliest Cub Scout knives were just plain slip joints. There's no half stop on the main blade. That will come around later, sometime in the early 1950s. But it does have these two safety features for the Reamer and the cap lifter screwdriver, and with these liner locks that hold them in place. None of the blades on this will lock. And one of the big problems with these can openers, regardless of what kind of can openers you have on them, up until the invention of the safety can opener, these can openers were actually probably the most dangerous blade on a pocket knife. More people were injured using these can openers than the actual cutting blade or anything else, and it's because of the way the can opener would open the can with you rocking down and ripping up into the can. So people were constantly cutting their hands and fingers on either the can opener or on the can lid itself. And it was to a point in World War II that they actually were having soldiers injured with can openers on their knives, that the Army actually started looking for ways to improve the can opener so soldiers would start hurting themselves. And if soldiers, grown men, were hurting themselves using these can openers, imagine giving this kind of device to an 8-year-old who doesn't even have the strength to actually pry open cans. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Cub Scout knife went to a Reamer instead of a can opener. And actually, you will see knives from the 1930s and such where you'll find the 4-blade can openers that have, the 4-blade Scout knives that have the can openers removed, or you'll see them with a broken can opener so that the boys would not be able to use them. So if they would not remove them, they would break them so that boys would not actually use the can opener and injure themselves. So if you're taking those kind of measures to make sure that the boy would not use this can opener, why not just go ahead and replace it with a Reamer? So that, I think, is why this knife is probably the predecessor to the official Cub Scout knife, and why instead of having a can opener, they switched over to a Reamer on the new official Cub Scout knife in 1948.
Okay, so let's recap. The Boy Scouts of America were formed in 1910, and they adopted an official knife in 1911, and several companies followed up with unofficial Scout knives around that same time. Junior scouting programs with no connection to the Boy Scouts of America started forming as soon as 1913, and several knife makers started making smaller frame knives that they called Junior Scout knives at that time. It wasn't until 1930 that the Boy Scouts of America launched their own junior scouting program, which they called the Cubs, or the Cubbing Program. Soon afterwards, several knife makers started calling their junior scout knives Cub Scout knives. These were unofficial Cub Scout knives and had no connection with the Boy Scouts of America. However, around this same time, the Boy Scouts of America came out with their own small frame Scout knife, which was an official Boy Scout knife that had three blades, a main spear blade, a can opener, and a cap lifter screwdriver. And then finally in 1948, the Cubbing program became officially the Cub Scouts of America, and a newly designed small frame official Cub Scout knife was adopted by the Cub Scouts, and this one featured a reamer in place of the can opener. That brings us up to where we're at now, and for the next episode, we'll be looking at tang stamps that you'll find on Cub Scout knives. So stay tuned for Cub Scout tang stamps. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Knife Chats, and if you did, please like and share it with your friends. Comments are always welcome. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode of Knife Chats is up online. Thanks again. Hope to see you soon.